words are in a picture?
A lot, probably.
1,000. So how many pictures are there here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's actually like 7 to 10,000 words in this picture. It's just knowing how to interpret it. And so how would people back in the day interpret stories? How would they preserve their stories? Carve it in a totem pole, but then to interpret it, you need that oral history, that interpretation. And so a lot of times, a lot of different teachers nowadays are doing things called decolonializing knowledge. That means that knowledge without connection is a little bit empty. But in that oral history, you actually have a connection and an interpretation of the thousands of words that are in here. And so I want to share with you some oral history that actually gives you a connection to knowledge, more than just reading it on a board and walking away after about 2 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to start at the very top of the totem pole. You all see that symbol up there? That represents Siam. So Siam, so I just said that word, Siam. That means like, oh, respected people. The Latin, listen up. So listen up, respected people. So Siam is respected person. And Sish means high, high up. Sish is highest. So Siam, that's the highest respected one up there. So that's the Great Spirit. So that's Naschalicha up there. Naschalicha Siam, Naschalangan, the teachings. The teachings come from Siam, the respected one. And that respected one watches over everything else down below. And all the teachings come from up top down below. First, those teachings come to the eagle. Okay, people were here, people were very poor, didn't really know what to eat, so we watched our ancestor, the eagle. We watched what the eagle ate. We saw that the eagle was eating the salmon. So we thought, oh, okay, the eagle's powerful, the eagle eats the salmon, maybe we can try to learn something from the eagle. So that knowledge comes from Siam to the eagle, and then it comes down to the people. And we have here, it's a Coast Salish woman, okay, and she holds the reef nets. So it's actually, the reef net technology is actually a feminine technology. So it's the girls and the shlanny, and shlanny means one who weaves. It's actually what girl means in the language. Shlanny means weaving one, because the girls were the ones who would weave everything, weave your clothes, they would weave the nets to make the nets, and the guys would just go out, do the heavy work, and have that water skill, and have the loud voices to command the canoes. But it was the female, the shlanny, who would weave the nets, do all that work at the home, preparing everything. And she would create the reef nets. And then we have the female salmon here. How can you tell this is the female salmon?
Doesn't have a hooked jaw.
Doesn't have the hooked jaw, and the eggs. Yeah, you're right, they do even have the hooked jaw on there too. That's awesome. And also the eggs here too. And so that's another reason that the shlanny are so respected, because they're the ones who bring life. And the reef nets are just another example of how they bring life and continue supporting life. So we have these two salmon and the male salmon over here. And those salmons also represent the two canoes. Does anybody know how reef nets work?
And I'm gonna take a guess. Two canoes, and then they have somebody on the front of each canoe and hold it there and closing them, and then close them in on the back too.
Essentially, yeah. I'm just going to, real brief, Marco's going to explain more, but there's two canoes and there's a net spread between them, and it makes like a big pocket. Okay, and then the fish swim into there, and there's some other technical things that Marco will talk about. But so that technology also, with the big catch in the middle, sort of, and then the canoes sort of close together, and it forms like this big net womb. So it's also a feminine sort of technology. These two canoes fill up with fish, they come in together and close up that net, and then they bring those fish ashore. And so that's also sort of represents the feminine characteristics of the reef net technology. And then here a little bit lower after the people, we have the fish in the net. Okay, and we have these large stones. These are the anchors that people would use to hold the nets in place. And then we have this thing in the middle here, this human in the middle. Does anybody know what that might be? What does that look like?
Salmon people?
Yeah, salmon people. Anything else? So it's kind of a lot smaller, right? So there's also an old story about this boy who got taken away by the salmon people. He got snatched up because there was a time in history when the people didn't respect the salmon properly. And the salmon disappeared. And they took this human boy away, and the human boy lived with the salmon for a couple seasons. And then eventually the people caught the salmon that boy was inside, and they cut the salmon open, and the boy popped out. And he told the people that if you don't want the salmon to disappear, if you don't want to starve, then you have to know how to respect this resource. And I like to talk about that because it's important that people don't have this romantic view of the past, that everything was perfect and it was just wonderful, beautiful, bountiful everything and no cares in the world, because that's not true. There's a lot of stories in the traditional cultures around here that talk about times of famine, that talk about times when resources would disappear. And these stories are thousands and thousands of years old, and it took people a long time to figure out how to live in harmony with these resources, and they developed a lot of traditions to make sure that they were respecting their resources so the resources wouldn't disappear. And so today we have a really, the colonial culture that's here today that we're all a part of, more or less, is a really new culture. Okay, the culture before that spent thousands of years learning how to respect the resources so they wouldn't disappear. And now, as we're just learning about the oysters disappearing, the sea stars disappearing, we haven't learned those ways of respect, how to respect the resources. And so there's ways that we can connect back to those old ways, form good relationships, figure out how to respect. Hopefully the salmon won't disappear too, which they're really close to. So the boy told the people how to respect the salmon, different ways, how to make sure that the salmon people know are being respected. I'm not going to tell that whole story right now. But he sort of lives in here and represents that, how to respect this knowledge. Part of that is in the reef nets, there was a hole in the back of the reef net where the small fish could escape. Because you don't want to catch the babies, you want them to live to reproduce so they can come back next year. You only want to catch the adults that are at the end of their life. They've already reproduced. So there's a small hole right there, and that represents that respecting knowledge. So then you have the fish that are free at the bottom, and then the fish that are caught. And then down here, it's just a really old school style of straight Salish traditional design. And that was actually carved by the grandparent of the carver who did the rest of this story.
Grandson.
Grandson.
Grandson did it.
Oh, sorry, grandson did that one. So that's kind of a story about how the knowledge is passed down, and a little bit of perspective of that thousands of years of learning how to work with this resource. That's what these poles represent. I'll pass it over to Marco, and he can talk a little bit more about some things.
These totems have been a long time coming. That this park, English Camp, all the signage starts with May 21st, 1860, right? Nothing prior, no reference to this being one of the most important village sites in the territory, to any history prior to 1860. And part of that's due to federal regulations that the official federal park story for the San Juan Islands is the pig war, is the one pig. All the money on interpretive stuff needs to be spent on telling the story of this one pig. And a number of groups have tried to get some interpretive signage changed or created or more representative of the true history of the area. And a couple folks from Lummi, Troy Olson and Shirley Williams, had this vision about a year and a half, 2 years ago, to raise these totems in a cross-border Coast Salish fashion. And so the two outer boards were carved by Jewel James, who's Lummi, and the center one was by John Elliott, who's Saanich from Vancouver Island. So they came together across this border that's now dividing us to raise these totems here, and centered around reef net fishing, because reef net fishing is also being revitalized on both sides of the border. And they share a vision of having a series, a network of longhouses throughout the San Juans and Gulf Islands that people can move through and both harvest using modern technologies and traditional technologies like reef nets. Reef nets, I think, are really interesting because of this two canoes, the male and the female, and the schwalla, the reef net in the middle. And these reef net locations are fixed places. You don't just say, oh, I'm going to put a reef net over here or over there. There are certain places in the islands that always had reef nets, and they're facing in a certain direction, and they're only fished on certain tides, either when the tide's coming in or when the tide's going out, which is a lot different than the way we fish now, where we take our boat out with sonar and we go and find the fish and then encircle them with a net. In this form of fishing, it relies entirely on fish behavior, or you can think of the fish giving themselves to you. That you can put your net there, you put it in certain parts where the fish are moving fast, there's a lot of current, and there's some kelp, and the fish are really scared in that instance where they're stuck between rocks and kelp. They're worried about seals and orcas and things coming out and getting them. And you put your net out adjacent to that, and you make it look like a calm eelgrass bed. And so the fish are scared, they're swimming along, they see this calm eelgrass bed, and they dart into that, which is your reef net, this kind of square-shaped, box-shaped net with grass tied to the bottom. You've got a reef net captain up above looking down. It gives a signal to pull the net up once it's filled with fish. So it relies entirely on good weather, clear water, and fish behavior. And this type of fishing is really targeting sockeye salmon that are returning to the Fraser River. So out here we don't have large rivers. We don't have a lot of salmon returning to what's called a terminal fishery. The fish are going to die whether they're caught or not. Where that's what most of the salmon fishing was, right? You don't need to go out and chase the fish will come back to you. Well, out here we don't have that luxury, and so we had to develop other technologies like this to be able to catch the salmon as they move past. But in the past few years, because of climate change, we've had the warm blob in the Pacific Ocean that pushed the fish north through the inside of Vancouver Island into the Fraser River, instead of their normal route, which is south, coming through the Straits of Juan de Fuca, filtering through the San Juans and the Gulf Islands, and then going in to Fraser River. So in years like the past few years, this sort of technology would be a total bust. It would be those years that Sam was talking about. And additionally, that behavior can change. If you have your reef net out here on Open Bay by Henry, and the fish don't come by that year, not that many do, you need to rely on relations, you need to rely on other sources of food as well. And so there's a network of resilience built into that. There's many reef net locations throughout the islands, knowing that not all of them are going to do well every year. And so realizing that, you're going to use family relations to work somebody else's gear to have some way to ensure that you get fish that year. These anchor stones here were often on the order of hundreds of pounds, 500 pounds or more. And they were moved out every year and dropped with cedar cordage in the same spot. These rocks are so huge that to move them, you'd wait for a low tide and you'd find your rock, tie some logs to it, wait for high tide to come in, and it would float the rock up. You'd move it out to your spot, tie your rope on, and drop the rock. Divers, ROVs, underwater cameras, and high-end sonar have gone over reef net spots and seen piles 10, 20 feet tall of these rocks, piled up perfectly. So over many years, people have been dropping rocks in the exact same spot with no GPS, no electronics, just knowing the tides, currents, and where they're at, be able to drop one rock on top of each other, which I think is absolutely amazing. It's hard to drop my anchor in the same spot with all the currents and all that sort of stuff. So there's been a lot of precision and technology that goes into that. donated all its grams, then carved the lower part, which is a more traditional style. So it's kind of cool that the younger generation is formed the more traditional style. That's the base of the totem. They hope to kind of expand this and put up some more storyboards, but I really want to impress on what a monumental feat this was, that two individuals had this vision to tell the Coast Salish history of this area, and were able to get it done. They were able to get the artists to donate the totems, they were able to get parks to agree to have this raised. They held an event last August when the totems were unveiled that was attended by hundreds of people. They actually invited Justin Trudeau and Obama. They didn't attend, but they somehow got hand-delivered notes to both of them a number of times, inviting them to come, because the unveiling happened on National Park's 150th anniversary, so they're trying to get them to come. But it's also a symbol of cross-border partnership and trying to focus on Coast Salish nations and increasing those partnerships despite these national difficulties. Including this totem, when it came over, it was pre-cleared by customs, but they wanted a declared value for it. They kept asking the carver, "What's it worth? What's it worth?" And he's like, "It's a gift. It's a gift. It's not, it's a gift." And they wanted a dollar value associated with it, so presumably they could tax it. But it finally came through and got raised. Northwest Indian College crew, do you guys want to come up real fast? We'll close out and then start working out here. So thank you for spending the last 2 days with us. We appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. It's been great to be out here and enjoy this area together and talk about marine ecology and talk about the history. As the wind's picking up, we need to set sail by a four-stroke motor, I guess, and